Thank you, Emily, for the introduction. Yeah, so as Emily mentioned, I'm Jan Lawrence. I'm the Localization Product Manager for Games Global. I have been part of the organization and other subsidiaries of the organization for just over 11 years now, and I have just over 8 years of experience in the localization industry. So who's GGL, you might ask? Games Global is a leading developer and a distributor of innovative online casino-style gaming, often referred to as iGaming. We have roughly about 1,300 games live in the industry. These vary from poker, slot games, roulette, etc. All of these games get localized into 30 plus languages, and our banking and registration software into 46. We have around about like 40 plus studios around the globe, all the way from Australia to the US, and the business and the wider organization has been in existence for roughly just over 20 years now. So who are we? So my team is referred to as Localization Central, and the easiest way to kind of explain our function within the organization is we act as an internal LSP. So as you can see, the 40 plus studios that we have and the platform provider, which does the banking and registration software, will submit all of their projects to the Localization Central team, and it's our responsibility to manage these projects and deal with the language service providers. So we act as the middleman between the organizations and the LSPs. So as the title suggested, the memoQ mission. So what sparked our transition to memoQ from our previous TMS? Over a period of 6 months, we had 94 live issues with the previous TMS, which was quite significant. We had several broken SLAs with often no responses from the vendor for days, and data integrity. And as we know, especially in today's day and age, data is key. We couldn't simply rely on basic cost reports being pulled from the vendor. We ended up having to resort to calculating our own costs internally and having to use that because we couldn't trust the data coming from the vendor. Loss in confidence. This goes both ways. We lost confidence in the provider resolving the issues due to the amount of issues and the lack of response, as well as our studios and our internal clients losing confidence in us resolving the issue as well, and thus we had to make a decision to move to another provider. So what is the key qualifying criteria that we kind of looked at? One of it is the image preview. A key feature that we need in a TMS is to allow the linguist to identify the context and the strings that they are translating, especially in iGaming being quite short phrases, and a lot of context is needed in order to get an accurate translation. Advanced QA, the previous provider that we had very limited QA, and we needed something where we could generate profiles based on a language in order to get more accurate reports on a language level, which also allows us to implement additional functionality and automation. Custom workflows, anyone in the gaming industry would know that gaming can be quite unique in the workflow setup, and we need to ensure that we have a TMS that's going to allow us that flexibility. Custom reporting, just due to our constant drive for innovation, we need to have custom reporting to analyze the data so that we can see if we make any changes in our workflows, is it actually benefiting us in the long run. Auto cost calculation, we roughly receive about 250 projects a month, which is quite a lot, and thus auto cost calculation is key for us due to us working with multiple vendors, and we simply don't have the manpower to be able to deal with all of the cost calculations for each of those individual projects. Custom TM architecture, looking at the previous TMS system that we had, we weren't able to separate our translation memories based on game type or product type, and we needed something where we could separate each of the TMs based on the product type. So the solution that we found was a combination of FlowFit, the BMS, and memoQ as the TMS. So the user will come in and they will go to the FlowFit client portal and they will submit the project, which then makes its way to our team, the Localization Central, where they'll pick up the project and process it, and it will be sent to the vendors via memoQ. You can see that there is next to the project manager, there's a little police officer there. My team often feels like they're a police officer having to go like, sorry, no, you can't submit this project. This is the client, you're not adhering to the standards. So future-proofing. So although we identified a good solution, we needed to figure out a way, how do we manage to move away from the previous vendor, but also limit the business risk for future? So similar to the train tracks here, we had several internal applications that were just connecting all to the one provider. So we needed to find a solution for this. the solution was to find a single track that connects to the new TMS, and in this case, the BMS FlowFit. So the solution there was, so you can see previously we had the translation management system and each of the internal applications connecting to it directly, and our solution was to implement a translations API, which acts as middleware between the BMS and the internal applications. This limits the risk, so we need to change TMS or even BMS in future, taking that risk away from the organization. So just delving a little bit into the technical side of the translations API, referred to internally as TAPI. So we have the internal applications, which comprises of an API component, the front end, and a worker service. We have a message queue, which we're using RabbitMQ. RabbitMQ will pick up a message from the translations API and send that to the internal application if a project is completed, or if there's any status updates. If a project gets completed, then the message will send that to the internal application. The internal application will then make a call to the translations API to retrieve the files. This limits the amount of interaction on the API. Going over to the translations API side, we have the API, of course. We've got caching, which gets cleared every 4 hours, which I'll delve into now. And then we have the DB, and then obviously the worker service running as well, which checks for any updates from FlowFit side. The caching is a recent implementation that we've done about like 2-3 months ago, and it was due to the number of volumes that we work with being so large. We had significant calls being made to the database, which increases or decreases rather the performance of the application. So building in the caching kind of reduces the amount of calls being made directly to the DB, and therefore makes the application more efficient. So as I've mentioned, when the worker service runs on the translations API, it will pick up any updates from FlowFit, and FlowFit communicates directly to memoQ. So what are some of the functionalities that the translations API offers? Is creating projects, project progress, downloading of source and target files, standardization of locale, and reporting for our monthly cost reconciliation. So the rollout plan. So initially we started the 1st of Jan 2022 was the development start for TAPI, the translations API. And then on the 1st of April, we wanted to do a soft live. Our platform provider is not connected to the API. Therefore, we could say, okay, well, we can take the platform provider over and do a soft go live, just test out FlowFit and memoQ and see how operations are running. Then on the 1st of July, we would have TAPI implemented fully, and then we could move over the rest of the organizations, which includes the 40+ studios. We can move those over to the API and then essentially deprecate the previous TMS. We had a black date for our contract with the previous TMS provider on the 31st of July. So it was still quite close, but we had a month of window period there that we could work with. And then a continuously monitoring period for another few months until the end of September. But as we all know, things doesn't go according to plan, unfortunately. Wasn't too bad at least. But yeah, so everything was on track until the 25th of July, very close to the black date. We ended up going live with the translations API. We thought it was all well, and then 2 days later, we were dealing with several live issues, very close to the black date. But it wasn't significant in the sense of it didn't stop us from moving over entirely. We were still able to deprecate the previous TMS, which was good, else we had to extend for another year, which obviously we were trying to avoid. So just delving into the issues, one of the most major issues that we dealt with was English slipping into the target language. This kind of spread like a wildfire through the organization. So what essentially happened is we had incorrect configuration on FlowFit's side, which prematurely pulled files from memoQ, and due to the architecture internally on one of our internal applications, it ended up spreading the English throughout all of the games. So you can see it just went into the Mortal Romans, as an example, and the next update gets made to Relate Mega Muller. It pulls in all of those English strings. And obviously due to it being English and we're assuming it's going to be correct target language, we had no infrastructure in place internally to pick up English, and we ended up having to actually do DB searches to pick up and identify each of the English strings, which is quite a complex thing as well, due to a lot of the terms being or a lot of the strings being quite short, like spin, and a lot of languages don't have that translated, so you're kind of going through this whole elimination process. And also, just for clarity, none of these games had any live issues, at least. So all of that was fixed before go live. The second issue, leaving myself and my team feeling like zombies, was manual closing of tasks. This was another incorrect configuration on our side, and we had to end up closing several tasks manually. And these tasks are accumulated for each language and each project, so you're roughly looking at around about like 30-odd tasks per project. And obviously, because we were moving away from the previous TMS over to the new solution, we had a down period for about 2 weeks. So we had a backlog to deal with as well, which was submitted the moment we went live. So it was not even just on normal, like average of 20 projects a day. It was an accumulation of 2 weeks projects that was coming in that we had to manually close tasks. Lessons learned, key man reliance. This was quite a big one for us as well. We only had one developer in the team at this stage when we implemented the translations API. And unfortunately, he wanted to relocate to another city, and he resigned shortly after the implementation, which kind of left us in a very difficult spot. Luckily, we had another developer from one of the other teams, from one of the internal applications, that was quite familiar with the architecture and the development, and they were able to assist in the interim until we found a new developer. Plan for the worst. Myself and my team, I think we're quite optimistic people, and we always think everything is going to go according to plan, which it never does. So just a heads up on that. Always add a little bit more buffer than what you would expect. The API load testing, like I mentioned as well, we ended up going with the soft live. We did the FlowFit portal that we tested, but we didn't actually do any testing on the API on our side, which if we did, we would have picked up that there was issues with the manual closing of tasks coming from the API side. Because when we did the soft go live with the FlowFit portal, we didn't have any issues for that period, and we suspected that would be fine. And then we figured out, after we connected the API, that there was issues. Sharing of keys across studios. So where the English kind of started spreading into all of the games is one of the internal applications shares strings and the keys across various different games, which is not a good practice, and this is something that we need to correct. Because essentially, if you're going to pull a translation in from one game and one particular string, and another game is using the same key and the same source string, it's just going to obviously mirror that same error as well. The benefits realization, this was quite significant for us. So this is over a 6-month period for both providers. Our previous TMS, we had 94 issues, as I've mentioned, over the same period after the go live. Because obviously there's always teething issues, so we didn't include the teething issues in it. But once everything stabilized after the 30th of September, we started measuring, and over a 6-month period after the 30th of September, we only had 6 issues between FlowFit and memoQ side, which is a 94% reduction in issues. From production days lost, with the previous provider, we lost 50 days of production. This is either on a single project or an accumulation of the entire system being down, which obviously affects then all of our clients. This is a 90% reduction. Like, we went down to 5 days only being lost to production work. Our workloads over this period has also increased over this period with 27%. So even with the workload increasing by 27%, we still had a significant amount of less issues with the new solution that we found. Our TMS reliability, along with the BMS, went up from 91.5% to 97.7%, which is excellent. And that's it. Got any questions?